Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Mythgard Academy's first session on our discussion of the nature of Middle-earth. I don't have my Nature of Middle-earth slide up because today is also another important thing, and that is Bilbo and Frodo's birthday, which means on Bilbo and Frodo's birthday every year for the last, 8-9 years now, Signum University has begun our fall fundraising campaign. This is a huge moment in the annual cycle for Signum University, and it's on the one hand, it's kind of the time when I make sure to remember to ask everybody to support Signum financially. But of course, more importantly, and the part that I like best is the part. It's the time when we celebrate the folks who have made Signum University possible. So I'm going to share some stuff from this past year. I won't talk for too long, but we got some really exciting things coming up, and then we'll get to our Nature of Middle-earth discussion because it's kind of a twofer here tonight. Yes, happy Hobbit Day to everybody. Yeah, anyway, so, okay, very good. Sorry, I've got a new setup going on tonight, and it's a little distracting, and I'm trying to get everything straight. But there we go. I think I got everything working here. Anyway, so, a little reflection first on last year's campaign, which was amazing because we set an all-time record last year. Last year for Signum University's annual fund, we raised $81,170.27, a record, the most we have ever received in donations in a year ever before, and it was just amazing. So I cannot thank enough all of the people who made this possible. Yeah, Tarlonio in the middle of a pandemic too, I know, right? I mean, it's just been amazing. The generosity it's been blowing me away for years, and recently much more so. So thank you so much to everybody who donated and gave. We have a lot of people give regular monthly donations, which is so valuable to us for being able to kind of predict income and cash flow over the course of the year. But of course, everybody who gives a one-time gift also, that is also very, very much appreciated as well. So thanks to everybody who gave. And let me tell you the goal of this year's campaign. This year, we achieved $88,000 last year, which you remember what the target was last year that I announced? Some of you with retentive memories may recall that I said $65,000 was our goal for the year, and we raised $88,000. It was amazing. So this year, I'm just gonna go for it. The goal for this year is $100,000. We've never gotten to six figures in a year before, but we're already well on the way there, and I think it's very possible. So the goal this year is $100,000. Now let me show you what this looks like. Right? Let me show you what happens. Like, because some people always want to know, very understandably, like, where do my donations go when I'm giving to Signum? What's my money going to? And the primary answer of what your money goes to is people. Your money goes to people. More than 90% of Signum's total budget is people, is pay, is salaries. And in particular, let me give a little bit of a backstory. So many of you will remember, some of you, I think, have even been around since the days when I was running Signum University out of my walk-in closet when I lived in Delaware, when there was like me and one other volunteer staff person who was running 100% of Signum University. Those were the fun early days of Signum University. And what has happened from the beginning, we have committed to paying our faculty from the very beginning. Faculty who have been teaching our courses have been paid from the beginning, but a lot of our staff work has been done by volunteers as we've gone along, and that's been true over all the years. Not 100%, but there are a number of people, and there are some people who have been with us the whole time, who have been volunteering for years for Signum, and some people who do some work for pay and volunteer some work. We just wanting to a lot of people have given so much, not only of their finances, but of their time to make Signum possible. And we are working really hard on transitioning into paying people what they deserve for the work that they do. So check this out. Since we raised so much money last year, look what we were able to do. This is a graph of our non-faculty salary payroll over the last 3 years, and then the final column is the projections for this year. Look at the jump from last year, right? We paid over $90,000 in salary more last year than we did the year before. So, like, every penny of that $88,000 that we raised went into paying people. And I got to tell you, hiring people is like my favorite thing. Like, the best thing about running Signum University is being able to hire people, being able to give people jobs. It's like this incredible win-win situation where we have resources, we can like do more things for Signum, and we can accomplish more at Signum, and I get to like give awesome people paying jobs. Oh my goodness. It's just like, again, the best thing in the world. Our projections for this year is that our salary payroll is going to increase again, at least another $60,000. We'll see where we end up, what we end up being able to do. But being, enabling us to compensate people for the wonderful work they do to make Signum and all of its programs and all of its things happen. It takes a lot of work behind the scenes to run a university, turns out. That is what we use our donations for, and I find that so exciting. Yeah, exactly, Simon. We more than tripled our salaries in a single year, right? It was awesome. That was just like, this is such an awesome year. Anyway, so that's just wanted to share what's going on now. Donor appreciation. I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, but of course, as many of you know, if you've seen our fundraising campaign stuff in the past, you know that we have a robust donor appreciation program. We love to give gifts in exchange, to show our appreciation for the people who make donations and who support us. So let me show you. If you go to signumuniversity.org/fund, which is this page here, right, and it's our annual fund page. And if you jump down to the bottom of this page, right, this down here is our donor appreciation program. And it shows you for different annual donations you make, the gifts that we give in exchange. For instance, membership on the Council of the Wise to nominate Mythgard Academy seminars. Everybody who donates $200 or more gets membership in the Signum Fellowship. And every month I have a private meeting with the Signum Fellowship and to give folks updates about what's going on and share what's happening and answer people's questions and stuff. It's been really cool over the last couple of years doing the fellowship. We have, of course, all of our moots, all of our conferences, our regional conferences are going to be hybrid this year, and so we have some special VIP access to our both to MythMoot and to our regional conferences in different configurations. You can read the details there for folks who give $500 or $1,000 or $2,500. So lots of really exciting things. I will leave you to look over this more yourself, but. It's as I say, we just love to show appreciation for our donors, and I'm so grateful for everybody who has given. Now, the other thing I want to do, and I won't take too long again because I have been just giddy with excitement to start talking about the nature of Middle-earth. So much elf math to get into. Oh, it's just so heavenly. But I also like to start the fall fundraising campaign by sharing with everybody a little bit about our theme. So you saw at the beginning our theme for the year. The Final Frontier, Rediscovering Learning for All. And so I just wanted to share something about our focus. Rediscovering learning for all. Learning what you love has always been a huge part of what we've done at Signum. And we really want to encourage the love of learning, not just, thinking about learning, about education on a purely pragmatic basis, right? Like just to gain credentials in order to get a job or whatever. But thinking about embracing the love of learning. I mean, it's like the best kind of fun that you can have. Signum has been for a long time dedicated to providing as many opportunities for learning as we can. And this year in our fundraising campaign, one of the things I really want to focus on, that I really want to kind of emphasize and celebrate, is the breadth of our programs, because we, between the programs we currently have and the ones which are coming very soon down the pike, we've covered like almost all areas of life that different people are in, right? You know, we've got, for instance, our graduate studies, right? That's kind of where we began. This is the cornerstone of Signum University, the Signum Graduate School, specifically our MA program in Language and Literature, and our graduate diploma program in Language and Literature. That's, by the way, just a little name change. We've had our certificate programs in our different concentrations. The graduate diploma program is we've changed the name there a little bit to clear up a little confusion in other places. But anyway, so this has been the core of what we've done. Our rigorous, intensive graduate study, which has focused on imaginative literature, Tolkien studies, Germanic philology, and classical, medieval, and Renaissance literature. And these are fantastic programs, and we have more than 100 students who are currently enrolled in our graduate programs. It's really, really exciting. But of course, I know that, graduate programs in language and literature are not necessarily for everybody. That doesn't meet everybody where they are, right? So we have other programs as well. Of course, we've got our Mythgard Institute programs, which we've been running for a long time here as well. These free public programs, of which what I am doing this evening is one, that we make available to lots of folks. And even those, we're going to be expanding some new Mythgard programming later this year too, which is really, really cool. So we've got our open public programs there, focused especially on imaginative lit. We have our professional development program, the Signum Path program, to enable people to gain really crucial training in communications and people skills, which has been a really great opportunity for people. We have K through 12 covered, right, with our Signum Academy Clubs program, which is an extracurricular program for kids. Okay, it's technically not K through 12, it's 3 through 12, grade 3 through 12. We may get around to expanding to K through 2 someday also, but and of course we have our undergraduate program coming soon. I was talking in last year's campaign about the development of our undergraduate program in the applied humanities, which we're really excited about. That's been a little bit delayed. It's been delayed in the accreditation process, but we're still excited and planning about that. So again, like no matter what the age, level of interest, there's been something for almost everyone. But there's been another dream that I have had for a while to really kind of complete this set, and that is continuing education, like more opportunities to learn random stuff for fun. Graduate programs are awesome, as I said, but like that's not where everybody is. The public programs are cool, but like I'm only one person, and there are a lot of other interests that people would like to pursue. I've wanted to create a program that will enable people to benefit from a wide array of new, high quality, but low pressure avenues for learning. And so I am very pleased to announce that later this year, we will be launching the Space Program, Signum Portals for Adult Continuing Education. This is going to be really, really cool. Now, we're going to talk about the nature of Middle-earth here in just a minute. So I'm not going to spend more time tonight going into all the details of the space program. But what is going to happen in the space program? You're going to be able to take individual space modules, which are going to be about a month long, which will enable you to do things like learn new languages. Like, have you ever wanted to learn to speak a new language? What about to read a language like Old Norse or Anglo-Saxon? Would you like to study other areas of literature or film or lots of other things, almost anything you could want to do. We're looking into, in our very first round of space modules are going to include things like modules on Japanese anime and modules on mythology and folklore and fairy tales and all kinds of things. So there's going to be like really flexible subscription options to the space program. It's going to be so much fun. So more details coming on the 16th of October. October 16th is going to be the date of our annual Webathon. It's always the culminating event of our fundraising campaign. So we're having our Webathon on Saturday, the 16th of October. And in that webinar, I will be doing I'll be giving my State of the University address. And in my State of the University address, I promise to give you all the details about the space program and how it's going to work and how you can sign up and all that kind of thing. And some of it, like what are the things we're going to be offering first and all that kind of thing. So that is what is coming, and it's going to be really, really fun. Now, last thing is another thing we do in our fundraising campaigns every year, as you guys will remember, is prize drawings. But we're going to do the prize drawing a little bit different this year. Here's how we're going to do it. So every week, I'm going to be giving away a major prize. Okay, we're going to do a drawing, and we're going to do it in this class. Every Wednesday evening in this class, I'm going to do the drawing. And here's how it's going to work. Well, okay, first of all, let me tell you what the winner gets. The winner of the drawing gets a golden ticket, right? You get a golden ticket, which you can redeem for one of 4 options. Either one of our new space modules, one of our Signum Path courses, 1 month of our Signum Academy Clubs subscription, or 1 anytime audit registration for one of our graduate courses. So you can audit one of our graduate courses, you can get a month of clubs, you can get a path course, a 1-month path course, or you can get one of our new space modules. And you can choose which of those 4 you want. You could give it to someone else if you want. So like maybe you want to get a month of clubs for your niece or something like that. You can totally do that. So anyway, that's what we're going to be giving away. And we're going to be doing that every week during the whole campaign. So, and to qualify, again, the campaign's all about showing gratitude to our donors. So everybody who makes a donation to Signum University between now and next week will be entered in the drawing. Now, if you are already registered, if you're already doing a monthly donation, then don't worry. You'll be registered. Like whichever week your monthly donation falls in, that will count, and you will be entered in that week. So I promise everybody who is signed up for a monthly donation already will be entered in in at least one of these drawings. Now, of course, if you want to increase your odds of getting chosen, you could make a separate donation during a different week, and we will enter you into that drawing as well, of course. So anyway, so that is what is going on. You don't have to sing a song if you win the golden ticket, Stephen. It's okay. Yeah. So again, next Wednesday. So from every donation that we receive, starting at 10 p.m. tonight, before class, and ending right at the beginning of class next time. Again, we'll do the drawing. I'll roll my dice right here live in the beginning of class next time. So there we go. All right. And I think that, okay, so how do you donate? Where do you donate? signumuniversity.org/donate, of course, is where you do that. So there we go. All right. Excellent. So thank you everybody for all of your support to Signum over the years. And let's talk about the nature of Middle-earth now. So here we go. I've got all my things. Here we go. All right. There we are. My Nature of Middle-earth slides. Okay. Woohoo. Now, let's make sure I can get my my chat boxes open and everything. Okay. Very good. Excellent. No, George, I'm afraid the golden ticket does not come with a chocolate bar, in fact. And I will also add, to those of you who are chatting either on Twitch or on YouTube, I can see your comments as well, but it's a little harder to follow because there's like more stuff to kind of sift through. So I will try, if you make a comment or an observation, I'll try to catch that there. But I will... No promises. The Zoom link that I sent out, that's where I'm watching the Q&A box there. That's primarily where I'm going to be interacting with folks. So, okay. Yes. Very good. Very good. Tolania was asking who did the cover art for this book. That's Ted Naismith. That's a Ted Naismith there. It's actually like a revised version of a Ted Naismith painting. I've seen a different version of that one. But yeah, so tonight, Of Time in Arda, which is a title that comes up in the book, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, as I've been just giddy to talk about this book, I think perhaps some Tolkien fans might have opened the book and, you know, paged through a few pages and started to see all of the tables of numbers, right? All the columns of figures in here and been like, whoa. I know some of you were really excited. Stephen, I remember you saying, you know, it's like, it was like a chocolate and peanut butter thing, right? Somebody got, you know, their math in my Tolkien. Anyway, it's very, anyway, I think it's immensely exciting. And I'm going to try to explain some of the things that I think are so exciting about it. I felt like, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that before I was 3 pages into this book, I felt like my understanding of what was going on in the last 20 years of Tolkien's life had changed very significantly beyond what, above where it was before. Hang on a second. I'm trying to re-expand things. It's not fully expanded. Okay. And so I'm going to try to explain that a little bit because, of course, one of the basic questions, one of the kind of, I don't want to quite call it a mystery. That's not quite fair, but I guess I will. One of the mysteries has always been, why didn't Tolkien finish the Silmarillion? Why didn't he publish it himself? Right? I mean, when you look back over Tolkien's life, Tolkien tried to get the Silmarillion published on several occasions, right? He was sending out bits of the Silmarillion to publishers and floating that to see if anybody would be interested in publishing that. Early, like in the 20s, he was doing this, right? And everyone was like, no, thank you. Thanks, but no thanks, right? Oh, what a lovely epic poem about Beren and Luthien. That really, it's nice, but no thank you, right? That was Tolkien's experience. So you'll remember, and we talked about this when we were doing, especially when we were doing the Lost Road Mythgard Academy discussion, that when he published The Hobbit, well, no. When The Hobbit got published and succeeded, right? When The Hobbit was selling like hotcakes, that was the moment when Tolkien knew he had the publisher eating out of his hand, right? And so we were looking, a lot of the text of volume 5? Volume 5 of the History of Middle-earth. Sorry, my bookshelf is right over here, is why I keep looking over there. Volume 5 of the History of Middle-earth, called The Lost Road. A lot of that material is stuff that he was writing and putting together during that time in 1937 when he was like, it's happening, right? The Silmarillion is gonna finally be published. Now they'll publish, they love The Hobbit, and so he gets all this stuff together and he's writing all this stuff and he's like, okay, here you go. Here, you want another book? Here's another book. And the publisher's like, that's not exactly what we were thinking of, right? What we'd really like is another Hobbit book, right? Could you write another fun book about hobbits? Not whatever that is, right? And so Tolkien set aside the Silmarillion materials again and started the Hobbit sequel, which of course turned into The Lord of the Rings. So that panned out and was fine. But of course there was another point in the 50s, in the early 50s, when he had written The Lord of the Rings and was trying to get it published, and he did jeopardize the publication of The Lord of the Rings, because of course it was 17 years, right? So his publisher, who had been panting for another Hobbit book, right? When it finally came around and was not only a delay of 17 years, but was was not the Hobbit book that he was expecting in the first place anyway. But anyway, like, he liked it. Like, the publisher liked The Lord of the Rings. But Tolkien still was, kind of remembering his excitement, I think, of, like 15 years before, and saying, okay, you can, if you like The Lord of the Rings, then let's publish that. But I want you to publish the Silmarillion with it, right? That's what I want to happen. And they said no. They said no, and he went and he was flirting with this other publisher, and then they said no. Anyway, that's then The Lord of the Rings gets published. After the publication of The Lord of the Ring, right? I mean, if Tolkien got big after The Hobbit, a few years after The Lord of the Rings was published, it was huge. There is no question that at that point he would have been able to publish the Silmarillion, right? His publishers, by the time The Lord of the Rings just boomed in the way that it did, there's no doubt in my mind that the publisher would have published anything that Tolkien gave him. I mean, goodness, look at what they did publish. Look at the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, for crying out loud, right? To please my aunt, I'm going to put together some revised editions of random poems that I've written. And the publisher was like, sir, yes, sir, we will publish that, sir, right? Like, he could have published the Silmarillion at any time, right? So again, the mystery. Why didn't he? Why didn't he? He had from, the late 50s until his death in 1973. He had more than 15 more years of his life to get the Silmarillion in order. And he had a publisher who was just waiting for the manuscript, and they would have published it. And it was his life dream, his life goal, to publish the Silmarillion. So why didn't it happen? Why didn't it happen? Now, in Morgoths Ring, when we discussed Morgoths Ring, which was last year, we finished that up in October of 2020, just over a year ago. It's what we were discussing a year ago this time. And in Morgoths Ring, we saw a glimpse of part of the answer to that question, right? Which is, his ideas began to change a lot. When he went back to the Silmarillion stuff, he seemed to find that he couldn't do it anymore. There was, and we talked about this a lot. And by the way, you will already have noticed in the first 5 chapters that Karl Hostetter, in his notes, refers to Morgoth's Ring like 50 times. Okay, maybe not 50, but many times, right? So I'm really glad that we did our discussion of Morgoth's Ring before we are discussing this, because that's going to be very, very helpful. So if you don't know Morgoth's Ring, you might want to go back and you can watch some of the episodes. The episodes are on YouTube in the Mythgard Academy section of the Signum University page. But anyway, in that discussion, we were seeing that when he had come to that momentous moment, when he married the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion together, right? That moment when he decided that all of that early elf mythology that he had written in his earlier days, right? And which he continued to be writing about and thinking about and developing the languages of. When he decided that the story he was telling, this new story that he was telling, the Lord of the Rings, was going to really be in that world. That did not happen right away. And those of you who have been around in these discussions for a while will remember that wonderful session that we had when we were discussing The Return of the Shadow, where we see what I am 100% convinced is the exact moment, like the sentence that Tolkien wrote in which those two worlds came together for him. And that sentence, of course, it was, "I will tell you the tale of Tenuviel," right? When Strider says that to the hobbits. Anyway, that was the moment. But after that moment, when he went back to the Silmarillion, he found it had changed, right? It had been brought into a completely different kind of story. And he couldn't go back to the heroic legends, just the heroic legends and mythology that he had before. There was something else that he wanted, and he wanted to make sure that this all worked together, right? He wanted to bring this together. He was telling a story. He was making a feigned history now, and he wanted to go back with a historical lens, looking at this ancient material, right? Well, anyway, so that's what we've seen before. What do we see here? Well, let's dig into the text. This is from Karls' Introduction. These two texts, by which he means the first two, from the first chapter, conveniently demonstrate that sometime between 1951 and 1957, Tolkien made two decisions that would have far-reaching effects on his legendarium. While the first of these decisions, namely to make the sun and moon coeval with Arda, the inhabited world, and its ramifications in and for Tolkien's subsequent writings and revisions, have already been documented and considered by Christopher Tolkien in the final 3 volumes of his monumental history of Middle-earth, and particularly in the section titled Myths Transformed in Volume 10, Morgoths Ring. The second transformative decision and its ramifications have not before been presented. As the second of these two texts shows, Tolkien had by 1957 decided that the number of sun years in a year of the trees, or Valian year, that is a year as it was passing in Valinor, should be greatly increased from the previous rate of 10 sun years equals 1 Valian year to a new rate of 144 sun years equals 1 Valian year, and thus vastly expanded the length of time in sun years of the events recorded in the annals of Valinor and subsequent chronologies dated in Valian years. Okay, now, I certainly agree with Karl that that's a huge deal, right? That's a big, big old deal that he goes from 10 to 144. But let's think about that shift a little bit. Well, hang on a second. Before we think about that shift, let's not skip over the first shift. Because this is something we did talk about quite a bit when we talked about Morgoths Ring. And that is Tolkien's, I almost said temptation. That's pejorative of me. I shouldn't do that. Inclination, perhaps? His inclination to bring the mythology of the elder days into line, to make it consistent, essentially, with the understanding of modern science. Right? That's what he kept doing. Right? What we see him doing consistently in that stage of things. Now. Yeah, Bruce says no, go with temptation. Yeah, no, I hear that. Okay, so here's the thing. And I think it's true that Christopher Tolkien did present Myths Transformed and like his version of the Ainulindale, where the sun is there from the beginning, where the world is round and the sun is there from the beginning, right? But those of you who did that discussion with me will remember that I certainly, and I think most of you guys who discussed that book with me rather hated it. And we were all expressing very great gratitude for the lovely woman who read his draft and said, I really like the old Flat Earth version better. And he seemed to go with that, right? He seemed to go with that. we see him continuing to think it through. This whole it needs to work with the way that we understand the world. In Myths Transformed, it's true. But again, even there, it didn't seem definite that he was going to do it, right? Now, here's the other thing. You may remember what I was saying about it at the time. I think I even said something like, if I could talk to Tolkien about it, this is one of the things in which I would say, don't do this, man. Right? In which I would want to give him advice, right? And the advice that I would have wanted to give was, it seemed like he was limiting himself. It seemed like he was limiting himself under a kind of an artificial restraint, if you see what I mean. There seemed to be, to me, one linchpin, or perhaps one final tether that was restraining his world, and getting in the way, conflicting in his mind, clearly conflicting with his mythological tendencies. And that one tether was his assertion that Middle-earth is our world. If he were just, and as I was saying in the last class, if he would just cut it free, right? Cut that last tie and say, you know what? This isn't our world. It's not our world. So it's okay. It doesn't matter. Because again, the problem was, he's like, well, the elves can't be wrong about the history of the world. Like, we know that the world wasn't actually flat and then became round. We know the sun really was there before the earth, right? And so the elves would know that. They wouldn't tell stories about creation that were incorrect, because they would have learned it from the Valar, who certainly knew on account of being there, right? So the elf mythology, the elf stories, the elf legends of creation and the formation of the world have to be true. They have to be right? So they have to be consistent to some extent with science, or at least science, the scientific understanding, of Tolkien's time. And again, I was like, look, if we could just cut that cord, right? Set it free, set Middle-earth free. Don't make it be our world. There's no reason for it to be our world, right? It's okay. And, and we were talking about like, well, we can kind of understand, that it was, oh, and sorry, Chad, I'm not remembering. Can somebody remind me of the name of the woman who gave him that feedback? Mrs. Who, I'm forgetting her name. If you guys could look that up. Ferrer, thank you, Greg. Catherine Ferrer. That was it. Catherine Ferrer. Yes, we were all grateful to Mrs. Ferrer. Anyway, so I said, just cut the cord, Tolkien, and then your world can be free, right? Then you can do whatever you want, and you don't have to have this artificial constraint imposed upon your world, right? That is what I feel like the first 3 pages of this book gave me a new understanding of. I was seeing it merely as something holding him back, right? Something like almost like a kind of obligation, almost like that he felt like he had to fulfill, right? But I think we begin to see the answer in the second paragraph, in the other transformative decision. On the one hand, it seems a relatively simple thing. He already had the concept. The years of the trees are longer than the years of the sun, right? So years as they pass in Middle-earth, they don't count time the same way in Valinor. Now, of course, the question of years was really important because he had been, for a couple decades already, writing annals, right? Catalogs, chronological catalogs of events as they happen. And so, when your whole narrative, or the vast majority of your narrative, now mind, Christopher Tolkien did not retain the annals structure in the published Silmarillion. But a very great deal of the prose which Christopher Tolkien has published in the published Silmarillion is taken from the annals that Tolkien wrote. And so when a great deal of your prose has a date at the start of it, you think about these things, right? Clearly. So he'd already decided that it was going to be bigger. Now, 10 to 1. 10 to 1, right? This gives us a glimpse into the way he was thinking about that. And I think there are two interesting things that jump out to me, right? One is it's a significant ratio. It's not like 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 or 1.5 to 1 or something like that, right? It's not just that the Valian years were a little bit longer. They're much longer, order of magnitude longer than the years of Middle-earth. So we can see already that he wanted this wide gap between the years as they counted them in Valinor and the years as they counted them in Middle-earth. One thing that we see as he's coming back and revising this in 1957 is that he wants 2 orders of magnitude. He decides that 10 is not cutting it, right? And he wants 144. He wants this to be, again, a whole other order of magnitude greater in difference. So we see him thinking bigger already in terms of that. But notice also, it's not just, and it should be much longer. He didn't change it from 10 to 100. He changed it from 10 to 144, right? Do you see the significance there? Or the implications, I guess I should say, of that? Just that simple fact. Base 12, right? We've got, on Bilbo's birthday to be celebrating 1 gross is, of course, appropriate. I agree, Rachel. Yes, Josiah, he is fleshing out his assertion in The Lord of the Rings that the elves preferred to reckon in 12s. For which there is actually almost no evidence in the previously published texts. Exactly. What we see is that one number, the number 144, tells us something. And it tells us not just, I'm going to reconsider this world in order to tie it to our world. It tells us, I am going to do thorough and consistent world building of the elvish world in a way that he had never done before, right? And that is, for me, the transformation that I get immediately from this book, is that when we were discussing Morgoths Ring, as you guys will remember, I was thinking, man, he's holding himself back. Why won't he let himself go? Now, he was letting himself go. This is what letting himself go looks like, actually, right? Because what he's doing is world building, is actually working things through so that he has a thorough and consistent system. People talk about Tolkien as world builder, of course, all the time, and very rightly. People talk about what a detailed world Middle-earth is, and how real it feels, right? But of course, even in The Lord of the Rings, there is one part of that world which is a little bit conspicuous for not being that detailed. The Shire is pretty detailed. We get genealogies and a full chronology, and we don't get all of the ancient history of the hobbits, but that's okay. We don't need too much more than we have there for it to feel real and for it to feel like it has a grounding in history and all of that kind of thing. But the elves, there's a lot of hand-waving about the elves, right? We don't get anything like the kind of detailed world building about the elves. He'd never done it before, right? And we begin to see him doing it. We saw this in Morgoths Ring, right? Especially in the section of Morgoths Ring called The Laws and Customs Among the Eldar. Now, this is my summary. This is not a quotation. This is just me extracting some points from the passages from the Laws and Customs Among the Eldar that Karl quoted in the introduction to the book. And so this is just some of the things that began to emerge as he begins to think through this stuff. Elves develop more swiftly in mind and can talk when they're 1 year old, more swiftly in mind than mortals, right? They can walk and dance and have mastery of their bodies by age 1. So he said, you'd see this tiny little, not toddler, because they don't toddle, right? They dance, right? I mean, they not only can walk around, they're elegant at age 1. Elves are, right? But they only grow to full stature slowly, not being fully grown until 50 or in some cases 100 years old. So they grow very slowly, even though they can talk really quickly and they're really their gross motor skills are top notch, right? Presumably their fine motor skills too. No, these are sun years we're talking about here, Martin. This is from the Laws and Customs Among the Eldar in Morgoths Ring. Yes, George, this is also when he started talking about Fea and Hröa, the spirit and the body. Absolutely. They get married early, about age 50, and have few children, usually less than 5. Elf babies gestate for a year and are often born on their first conception day. That is, on the anniversary of the day when they were conceived. And everybody knows when they're conceived, elves are in control of that. That doesn't happen by accident with elves. And so the elf mom and dad both know the day on which the child was conceived, and that's the day they celebrate. Not the day of the birth, though that often happens on the first, you celebrate your first birthday. Well, it's not a birthday, it's a conception day by being born, right? A greater share of the strength of mind and body goes forth into the begetting and bearing of children than among mortals. That is, of the parents, of both parents, father and mother, but especially the mother, but the father too. Anyway, this is some of the things that emerged that he talked about, and in some detail, in the Laws and Customs Among the Eldar. Now, Morgoths Ring quiz. How many of you remember when he started writing the Laws and Customs Among the Eldar? When did this come up? What was he doing? How did that come about, the writing of the Laws and Customs Among the... He didn't just sit down and say, I shall write a bunch of things, which I shall call the Laws and Customs Among the Eldar. Right? That's not what happened. What happened? Yes, James, exactly. James and Greg and Josiah. Yeah. The death of Miriel. He was reworking the story, and he got up to the death of Miriel, the birth of Feanor and the death of Miriel. And at that point, he paused for a very long time. And an enormous amount of text emerged, right? Because he didn't know how it worked. He had had the legend already. At least a version of it. Feanor, that is. But what it meant to conceive Feanor and give birth to Feanor, and what happened to Miriel after she died, and what it meant to remarry, and all these things, all of a sudden, it opened up all of these questions to which he needed an answer, because he was asking a totally different set of questions than he used to be asking. Again, once the Silmarillion material merged with the Lord of the Rings material, when those became the same world, he's now writing a totally different kind of story, and thus asking completely different questions than when he was just writing mythology back in the teens and 20s. So now he's asking, so he begins to answer these questions. He begins to talk about elvish marriage and pregnancy and growth and birth and and it kept going, lots and lots of other things, right? So all of this stuff emerges from the story, right? But again, the impulse that we see is this world-building impulse. He'd never answered these questions before. We knew more, he had done more world-building about dwarves, honestly, than he had about elves, as far as this kind of rigorous world-building is concerned. At that point, he had done more with dwarves, because he'd written in a sense, more about the dwarves, like in The Hobbit, and even later on in the way that was developed in The Lord of the Rings. Again, I'm not saying he wasn't interested in elves. I'm not saying that they were an afterthought. I'm saying that these kinds of questions he hadn't asked about them, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah, Arthur, elves marry at 50 and are not considered adults until 50. Yeah, getting married and having kids is like the first thing you do as an elf adult. That's like how you know you're an adult, right? When you've decided it's time to get married and have kids. Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, that's a really wonderful comparison. Stephen covers comparing it to that moment in The Return of the King when Pippin suddenly starts wondering about Gandalf's history. Remember, as they're walking into the throne room at Minas Tirith, and Pippin, who's known Gandalf for years, is suddenly saying to himself things like, who was Gandalf anyway? When did he come into the world? And when would he leave it? Right? What is he actually? Right? And I agree. It was like Tolkien sort of was having that same kind of moment with the elves, in a sense. Now, Tony, I think he might have been kind of relying on fairy traditions to fill in the blanks earlier to some extent. I don't know that he was... I guess I'd agree with half of that, Tony. Was he relying on fairy traditions? Yes. There were some things that he didn't feel that he had to spell out because he was kind of invoking fairy traditions. Yes. But was he counting on them to fill in the blanks? No, because he wasn't perceiving these as blanks. And of course, most of those traditions don't fill in these blanks. In fact, it's because he was following those traditions that he was leaving everything vague, right? I mean, like when you read, you read a story like Rumpelstiltskin, or you read a story Sir Gawain and Dame Ragnall, or something like that, like where the, Arthurian knight goes off into the woods and meets a hideous woman who makes him marry her, and then it turns out she's an elf queen, right? Like that kind of story. How many blanks are filled in about who elves are and how they work in those stories? Usually not many, right? It's a mystery, and that's the kind of story he was writing before, right? But now an inquiring mind wants to know, right? And Tolkien's is the inquiring mind. What we see, I think, one of the first things we see in the nature of Middle-earth is that once he started doing this, the inquiring mind wanted to know, and it didn't stop wanting to know, right? And so we see him. So my answer to the question, why didn't Tolkien rewrite the Silmarillion, is no longer what I would have given if somebody asked me that question a month ago. Somebody asked me that question a month ago. Why didn't Tolkien finish the Silmarillion? I would have said, because he couldn't. He was reconsidering so many things. It would have taken so much time to rewrite all of that stuff. He couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. That's not my answer now. Today, my answer to the question, why didn't Tolkien rewrite the Silmarillion, was he did. He started. He just didn't finish. And it's clear that he did start with intention. Look at this. This is from the beginning of chapter 3. And again, this is Karl, the editor, speaking. While I have not felt obliged to retain the precise order of texts as found in the Time and Aging file, I have done so for the first 5 texts that follow because Tolkien appears to have selected, relabeled, and, in the case of the first 3, assigned them Roman numerals, in such a way as to indicate a plan to assemble a larger work from them, to be titled Of Time in Arda. In the case of the first text, originally called Timescales, Tolkien assigned it a number and a new title. 1. The Quendi compared with men. The second text, originally called Youth of the Quendi, was likewise assigned a number and a new title. 3. Natural Youth and Growth of the Quendi. Karl points out that 2 appears to be missing. Oh yeah, right here. If there was ever a text 2, it appears no longer to reside in the Time and Aging folder. The third text was simply assigned a number, otherwise retaining its original title. 4. Summary of the Eldarin traditions concerning the Awakening, and the Legend of the Queviae, Quevian Yarna. Additionally, all the sides of these texts that had not previously been struck through were then renumbered continuously from 1 to 15, so pages 1 to 15. Now, do you see the implications of this? a lot of what we see in these early chapters is him apparently making notes. We can see him thinking things through. There's a whole bunch of these passages, and I'll point out some of them as we get there, a whole bunch of these passages for whom he himself seems to be the audience. It's like he's talking to himself, working out these things, right? Or maybe he's talking to Christopher. I'm not sure. Maybe there's not a huge difference between those two forms of address in his mind. But anyway, I'm not convinced that for all of those he's writing for an external reader. In fact, I might not even assumed he was thinking that way at all. But this evidence that Karl shows us here is very suggestive, isn't it? Timescales, youth of the Quendi, that's what he called these things apparently, right? Like it's what he labeled them when he was writing them. But now he's selected, retitled them, numbered the pages, and done a typescript. Exactly like he's preparing this for publication, right? In some form. I don't know in what form. Josiah, maybe it was future appendices. Maybe that's, in fact, what he was thinking of, right? I don't know. But it does seem that he has in mind publication here. That he actually means this stuff to come together. So again, my answer to the question, why didn't he ever rewrite this? He did. Here it is. Here's him beginning it. And this looks a lot like some of the things that we saw back in 1937, back in the Lost Road, when we were discussing that, when we see him beginning to try to put things in order for publication, right? And when we did that, by the way, when we saw that in 1937, what we saw is that there was no Silmarillion, really. Not as we think of it, not as a one-volume thing. He was going to publish a whole series of mini-books, right? The Annals and the Quenta Silmarillion and the Tree of Tongues, remember, and the Ambarkanta and the Ainulindale, right? All of those were going to be separate, but not necessarily separately bound volumes, right? But it was not just going to be one continuous book. Now, Christopher, I agree with you. It seems that had he proceeded from this sort of world building, the work that would have emerged would have been very different in character from the pre-Lord of the Rings elven history. I feel like it would have lost some of its mythic focus. I completely agree with you, Chris. I do. But it no longer feels to me like the same situation that I was dreading, honestly, when we were talking about Myths Transformed. We'll see if we can get around to why I think that. But anyway, okay. So let's dig in. This is not the official start. We've been talking about this for some time. But let's go back to chapter 1 here. From here, I'm going to mostly go in order. Through. And by the way, I have no aspirations to get past chapter 4 tonight. If we can get to chapter 4, I'll be impressed. But that's okay. It'll take as long as it takes. There are 12 tree hours in each Valian day, 144 days in each Valian year. But each Valian year equals 144 mortal years. Therefore, one Valian day equals one mortal year, and one tree hour equals approximately one mortal month. Time is recorded, for mortal purposes, during the days of the trees thus. VY, that is Valian year, 100. V day, 136. V hour, 9. That would be how you would record the 9th month of the 136th sun year of the 100th Valian year. Okay. In Middle-earth, originally, the Quendi appreciated and aged in 144 mortal years, or yen, as mortals in one mortal year. Therefore, when they went to Aman, they felt no change, but those who remained soon felt the necessary rate of mortality or aging. After the death of the trees and the ruin of Beleriand, the rate was about 12 years, equals one mortal year. The elves awoke in Valian year 1050, and reached Aman in 1133, after 83 Valian years, which felt as 83 years to them, but was, actually, 11,952 mortal years. Men awoke in Valian year 1150, or 100 Valian years later, 14,400 mortal years. Okay, so they woke up 14,000 mortal years after the elves awoke. Okay, now, what does all this mean? Stephen says, I feel like any moment we're going to be asked about a train leaving Valinor at a specific tree hour. Yeah, actually, Stephen, that's, to me, kind of precisely the point, right? It is a lot like a word problem. Notice the frame of this discussion. Let me explain what I mean by that. Like, what's the point? Why is he telling us this? Why does anyone, including him, care about this? This is the question that I keep asking. Why should we care? And why does he care? Those won't necessarily always be exactly the same answer, but why does he care and why should we care about this stuff, right? Okay. Look at that first paragraph. What's he doing? What's he doing here, right? What he's doing is summed up in that last sentence. The most kind of boring sentence of the whole paragraph, right? Time is recorded during the days of the trees thus. VY 100, V day 136, V hour 9 equals the 9th month of the 136th sun year of the 100th Valian year. Do you see what he's doing? He's translating. He's translating Valian dates to mortal dates. Valian dates to Middle-earth dates. That's what he's doing. He's giving us the key, right? Giving us the key so that we can perform that translation. Because presumably, whatever else this is leading up to, right? Whatever else this is leading up to, it's leading up to the annals of Aman, right? And the annals of Beleriand, which he'd already spent years drafting. And remember from Morgoths Ring, he's revising heavily during this period, right? So we know he's not abandoning the annals plan, right? The annals as a vehicle, as a literary vehicle, right? So what is this meant to be? What's the opposite of an appendix? It's like a prologue, I guess, as part of a prologue to the polished summary. I mean, this is going to be, by the way, I'll be interested to see as we go along what kind of evidence we get for this. We were talking, as I already mentioned, back when we discussed The Lost Road, about the evidence that we could see of what the Silmarillion in his head looked like, right? That thing that he wanted published, what was that thing that he wanted published? What was the thing in his head? I'm going to be interested to see as we go through the nature of Middle-earth, what kind of evidence we get about what the Silmarillion looks like in his head now. And this, I think, is one little indicator. I'm guessing that book part thing of time in Arda that he was talking about there is going to be something like a prologue to the annals to give us some context and make sure that we can understand things, right? Okay. Exactly. Something like a Concerning Elves section. That's exactly it. Concerning Elves. So yes. But again, notice he's translating. Valian year 100, Valian day 136, Valian hour 9. The 9th hour of the 136th day of the 100th year. That's how they're going to tell the date in Valian. But he's not just explaining. His goal is not merely to say, here's how they told time and did dates in Valinor. his primary point is to do the translation. In Middle-earth, what that will mean is the 9th month of the 136th year of the 100th Valian year. Because there are 146 mortal years in each of those Valian years, right? So 1 day, and so, 1 day equals, as he just explained, 1 day equals 1 year, 1 hour equals about a month. So now you know how to translate it. Now you know how to put it in. So it's the bringing together. So Stephen, this is where, to me, it is kind of like a word problem, right? If this is the date in, we could totally assign some homework on this basis, right? If this is the date in Valian time, what date is it in mortal time, right? If things happen on this mortal date, and then this king rules in Middle-earth for 100 years, in how many Valian hours will that king have been ruling, right? I mean, we could totally do word problems based on this, and that's exactly the kind of conversions, right? That he is wanting to do. And notice how he continues that in the second paragraph, right? In Middle-earth originally, the Quendi appreciated and aged in 144 mortal years as mortals in 1 mortal year. So again, he's saying, like, what does this mean? And he's still translating, right? When I'm going to be talking about elf time, when you see the Valian years going by in the annals, right? I want you to be able to translate it, O reader, gentle reader. I want you to be able to translate it in your head. I'm trying to empower you to do the math in your head, right? So that when I say, and Finwë ruled, in Tirion upon Tuna for however many years, right? That you can be thinking like, okay, meanwhile in Middle-earth, here's how many years had gone by during that time. Or like, Fëanor is exiled for this many days or whatever, right? What would it have felt like to a mortal who was there watching, right? Because remember when I say, and also like, what does it mean to the elves? They're only aging essentially at a 1 to 144 rate, right? But then later, after the death of the trees and the ruin of Beleriand, the rate was about 12 years to 1 mortal year. So their aging gets accelerated by a factor of 12, or their perceived aging, right? But again, he's enabling us to translate, as he then immediately applies it in that third paragraph. The elves awoke in Valian year 1050 and reached Aman in 1133. And then he helps us, right? This is what I want you, gentle reader, to be able to do. Okay, so they awoke in 1050 and they arrived in 1133, which means they spent 83 years in transit. But that actually means they were in transit for 11,952 years of the sun. It was almost 12,000 years that the elves were matriculating their way across Middle-earth to the coast, right? And then sailing across and landing in Aman, right? Josiah says, this brings a whole new meaning to the lingerers. Yes. Or faint-hearted loiterers, Josiah. Yeah. Loitering for an extra few millennia right there on the coast. Yes. Anna wants to know, how could they even walk that slowly? I know, right? I mean, slow walking is what they did. I don't think that they were in continuous motion in one direction that whole time. Though, Anna, it's another word problem, right? If the elves set out in Valian year 1050 and arrived in 1133 and they traversed, X number of leagues, what was the average speed of the we don't want to do that one. Because again, I don't think that necessarily is the thing. Yes, Arthur suggests that speech is not the only thing the elves taught to the Ents, apparently. Yes, exactly. That's right. So no, Stephen, I'm not going to be assigning homework. I'm not going to be assigning word problems. But as I said, I mean, they practically write themselves, don't they? Men awoke in Valian year 1050. They woke 100 Valian years later, which is actually 14,400 mortal years later. Now, you'll remember that Christopher Tolkien was pointing this out in Morgoths Ring, that when Tolkien was trying to make the, the awakening of the sun work and everything, one of the problems he was having was there's not enough time, right? I mean, he had from the beginning of the race of men to, the wars of Beleriand, it was only a couple hundred years. And he's like, that's not nearly enough time. Even if you multiply it by 10, I don't even know. Now it's easy. 100 years. Yep. That's plenty of time. 14,000 years passed by. Things become a lot easier. Now, anyway, okay. Now I agree with Tony and with what Chris were saying that this kind of migration over 12,000 years is not that far-fetched. In fact, when we look at the history of human migrations, that works actually for an entire society to be moving across. Now, the difference is, unlike, say, human societies migrating out of Africa into Asia, they had a goal. They were actually on a trip, right? They weren't, when human societies migrated out of Africa into Asia, they weren't responding to an invitation, right? When that happened. So it's still a different context, but I agree. It's not, totally far-fetched. Okay. Now, Kurtz, that's a great question. What were they counting years by? We count by celestial signs. What were they using? We're not told because, of course, this is being counted in Valian years. So I think these years are being counted for them. I think it's the Valar who are counting these years, right? And the elves are going to learn this count of years, right? But at the time, I don't think the elves didn't know it was 1050 in Valian years when they awoke by Cuiviénen. As I don't believe they actually knew that. Okay, let's keep going. In a revised scheme, this is from chapter 2 now. In a revised scheme in which the sun and moon are a primeval part of Arda, established before Arda was habitable, the basic time, even in Aman, must be the sun year, since this governs all growth, be it slow, normal, or quick. But the sun day need not be observed, since Valinor was domed over. Pause. Those of you who did Morgoths Ring will remember this, but for those who didn't, of course, there were several things, and we saw this tension a lot when Tolkien wanted to say, okay, no, let's make it work. The sun and moon are there from day one. No more, flower of Telperion in the sky. No. There's a sun and the moon, and there's the earth that orbits them and everything, and the elves knew that perfectly well, and obviously the Valar knew that. Anyway, we saw that there were a bunch of places where there was tension between mythological elements of the original stories, which Tolkien loved, and the newer sort of, at least sort of quasi-scientific version of the myths. And we saw that there were several places where he was willing to compromise, several places where he let the mythological version of the story go in order to make the new conception work. But there were some things he wouldn't compromise on, mercifully. One of those was the trees, the two trees of Valinor. And not only that the two trees existed, but that the light of the two trees and the waxing and waning of the two trees should be the light of Valinor, that Valinor existed under the light of the two trees. So how does that work when the sun and moon are already in the sky and the earth is orbiting it and Valinor is on the earth, right? How does that work? And his answer to this problem was Varda makes a dome. Varda encases Valinor within an opaque dome. So the sun and moon do not shine in Valinor. Instead, the trees within it and illuminating the dome underneath, that's where the light of Valinor comes from. So that's, Aiden, that is since when Valinor was domed over. That was his solution to this problem. So, okay. So again, days and nights, Sundays and nights, meaningless in Valinor because they don't even see the sun, right? The seasons still change. So the sun years, yes, that's still relevant because they still have the 4 seasons. In Valinor because it's on the earth and we're revolving around the sun. So yeah, we've got seasons. So sun year, yes. Sunday, no, because we don't see the sun rising and setting. Hence, the basic equivalent of Valian time and Middle-earth time, VT and MT, will be 1 Valian day or tree day equals 1 sun year. All multiplications or divisions of this were by 12. Hence, the Valian month had 12 Valian days. 12 years, the Valian year, again, had 12 Valian months, 144 years. Okay, so 12 Valian days equals 12 years, because 1 Valian day equals 1 year. And the Valian year, which is called a yen, had 12 Valian months, right? So since 1 month has 12 days, So he's establishing the divisions, right? We have a year and we divide the year into 12 months, which is a good start, but then we go astray, right? Then we divide the 12 months into 30-ish days, right? And then we divide the days into 24 hours, which is close but no cigar. And then we divide the 24 hours into 60 minutes, which is like, what? 60? Where does that come from? And then we divide the 60 minutes into 60 seconds, concerning which, see above, right? So that's how we do these things. And partly this is based on how the sun and the moon work, right? Why 30 days? Why the 30? Well, the month has its root in the moon, right? So we've got the waxing and waning cycles of the moon. We've got the days and nights. So the 24 hours and the months, they're kind of programmed into Middle-earth based on what we actually experience with the movement of the sun and moon. Take the sun and moon out of the equation, and what can you do? Nice, even, base 12 divisions across the board. And that's how the elves and Valar roll, apparently, right? So 1 Valian year equals 12 Valian months. 1 Valian month equals 12 Valian days. 1 Valian day equals 12 Valian hours, and so on and so on. Right? Okay. All right. Yeah. Christopher says, I question the need for a month when there wasn't a monthly cycle to track, like the lunar cycle. Yeah, I agree, Chris. But again, notice all they have are divisions, right? They want to have, they see the convenience of not just measuring everything in years. They want to be able to identify things more narrowly. And notice, remember, they still have a touch point with the mortal world, which is the sun year, according to this schema, right? 1 Valian day is 1 sun year. That's the base. That's the base, Christopher, is the 1 day, right? Because a day of the trees equals 1 year of the sun. Apparently, you got to think Yavanna planned that. Yavanna, who knew better about the changing of the seasons than Yavanna, right? She's totally on top of that. So when she winds up the trees and sets them going, right? She has the trees waxing and waning in time with the change of the seasons, with the revolution of the sun, the revolution of the earth about the sun, right? And then everything else works. So in a sense, Chris, they're not devising months downward from years. They're going upward from days. Every 12 days, we shall call a month. And every 12 months, we shall call a year. And are those words, month and year, are those metaphorical? Yeah, I think so. In fact, I think they're translational, right? The words months and years are only being used in parallel to the terms we're already used to, right? But Josiah, you're absolutely right. The elves were metric before it was cool. Yeah, exactly. Just base 12 instead of base 10. Absolutely. Yep. These equivalences are exact, since the Valian day was maintained always at the length of the elvish loa or sun year, whether that varied or lengthened or not. Okay. All right. Okay. Notice how he is less focused on translation here. He's already shifted. And remember, I tried to note the dates here, right? 1957, 1959, right? By 1959, what he's focusing on more is just, how did the elves think? How did they work through this? How did they solve these problems, right? The elves and the Valar, right? Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. I don't know if you guys all laughed out loud like I did when I got to this place, but come on. Here's Tolkien doing his equivalences, breaking down Elvish time all the way to the minim, right? And here's his little note, or very nearly. At true value, this would be 35,831,807.9581 minims in a year. And then Karl, the editor, adds, Tolkien then wrote actual value and calculated the fractional part of the relation of a minim to solar seconds to approximately 360 decimal places, noting where values started to repeat. On the next page, he adds a sext before the minim, thus shortening the minim by a further 12. 300. This man did not have a calculator. This man, Tolkien, had another piece of paper, the back of another sheet of paper, next to the piece of paper he was writing on. And he started doing long division. And he kept dividing and dividing and dividing for 360 decimal places. 360 decimal places. Why do you do that? Why would anybody ever do that? Well, we only get one hint. Karl has given us one very interesting hint. That he was noting where values started to repeat. See, now, I can understand Tarloniel, somebody doing long division for fun when they were bored. I can. I really can. But he's not bored. One is tempted to make a joke like, come on, man, get a hobby. But this is his hobby, not long division. but it seems like he's distracting himself from his work, but it's not his work. It's his play, right? It's his play. And I hear that about having papers to grade, I'm sure. But if you have papers, he's already distracting himself from his papers by doing calculations about Elvish time in the first place, right? He's not going to get more distracted by carrying on the calculation wholly needlessly for 360 decimal places. I don't even know how you do that. I would love to see a picture of that, actually. Anyway, but you see the hint? I think we can see a reason why he started doing it. Noting where the values started to repeat. Why did he keep dividing until he got to 360 decimal places? I think because he started seeing patterns in the numbers and wanted to see how those patterns would play out if he kept going. I suspect that's why he did it. As there can't be. Not even Tolkien could have convinced himself that anyone would care about the ratio of elvish minim. So a minim is the smallest unit of time measurement for elves, right? Of the ratio between minims and seconds to 360 decimal places. No, but not even Tolkien would have believed that anyone would have cared about that level of precision. I don't believe that Tolkien kept going because he said to himself, well, this could be important. No, I think he started to see patterns in the numbers. Wanted to see what the patterns would look like. Tolkien loved patterns. We know he loved patterns. Somebody was referring to his newspaper doodles. Yeah. And also I would add, of course, his, what's it called? Heraldry, right? For the different elvish houses. He loved patterns, visual patterns. And I think we have here some evidence that he was interested in numerical patterns as well. Yeah. I wonder where the values started to repeat. Now I want more information on the 360 decimal places. But anyway. Okay. I felt like if this didn't give you a little bit of a glimpse into Tolkien's mind and how it worked, right? How Tolkien's mind worked when he was off duty. Not just how he speaks and writes in his published texts and things like that. Oh, man. John Barrow was asking, should we reenact the long division at the next moot? Yeah, absolutely. That's just what we should do. It's just what we should do. Yep. Very good. Very good. Amazing. Okay, so here's the equivalence. I love it. The Valian division of time. So an hour, remember an hour was equal to a month because a Valian day, which has 12 hours, is equal to a solar year. And so an hour is equal to a month, a Middle-earth month. But then how do we divide the hours? Because a month, that's a lot of time. And remember, as he's going to say, we haven't gotten to this point yet, but he's going to say, that's a lot of time for elves too. How long is a month for elves? It's a month, right? I mean, time doesn't pass faster for them. They experience it kind of differently, but it doesn't pass any faster for them. So the Valian hour, not a super precise piece of calculation. So they break it down into primes, seconds, terces, quarts, quints, sexts, and minims. Right? Why would we do minutes and then seconds? The elves are much more sensible, right? Primes, then seconds, then terces, then quarts, then quints, and then sexts. of course, obviously. Yeah. And so we get all the way down to a minim, which is 1/14 of a second. Approximately. Yeah, this is not the actual value, needless to say. But you can see how these things begin to be relevant. Now, here's... Josiah, I totally agree. Medieval chronographers would be in love with this system. Absolutely. I think that there are thousands of medieval monks who would have just loved this book so much. So much. They loved this kind of thing. Anyway, then here's the teaser. In the narrative, time lengths of less than the Valian second are seldom mentioned, and less than the Valian quart, which is 2 minutes, practically never. What? In the narrative, it seldom mentions any length of time smaller than a second, which is 5 hours. And less than the Valian quart, practically never. Do you all remember those references to Valian seconds and quarts in the narrative? Me neither. Right? It didn't do it. Right? It didn't do it. In other words, we can see him picturing. He's planning the narrative. This is not something he's doing instead of rewriting the Silmarillion. He is rewriting this. This is the preamble. This is the prologue to the rewriting of the Silmarillion. He fully intends to rewrite the narrative. And now he has all these shiny new tools, narrative tools to use. Now he can talk about Valian seconds. And the reader will know, because they have this convenient chart, that it's 5 hours, right? And he can say something that happened in a quart, which is 2 minutes. Oh, man. Yeah. He's going to use it. He fully intends. It seems to me that when he wrote this, he fully intended. This was just the necessary preliminary undertaking to the full revision of the Silmarillion text. So why didn't he ever rewrite the Silmarillion? He did. At least he started it. Here it is. He's starting it. This is it. He is doing world building, Lynn. Absolutely. Chris, I do think that it's interesting that he's using Latin-derived ordinals. I agree. It is interesting, or a little bit odd. Again, I have to think, obviously that's translational. It's not the word they used. Like, there's obviously a Quenya word for each of those terms. And so I wonder, Chris, if the whole, loose conceptual parallel, not linguistic parallel, but conceptual, sort of narrative parallel between Quenya and Latin. Quenya as Elf Latin was an idea, it was retained as a language of lore, though not used much in conversation. If that influenced this, so that when he wanted English words to translate the Quenya terms into, he went with the Latin in that way. So that's my best guess, Chris, as to why he would have done that. It makes a certain amount of sense in that way. Stephen, you're absolutely right. Signum needs to count down to Mythmoot in Valiant time next year. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And Josiah, I agree. Josiah is pointing out the parallel, when we look at Tolkien's notes, the notes that he was writing and that he was working with as he was writing The Lord of the Rings. He spent a lot of time working out in careful detail the lunar cycles, so that it would be consistent. And as Josiah says, it doesn't end up being intrusive in the final text. You can read the final text without knowing that he ever did that, right? But it is necessary to make it underlyingly coherent. And yeah, we can see him doing the same thing. He's setting up for the annals, right? Having this in mind and the equivalence in mind, he now knows how to, again, these are the tools that he's going to need in order to narrate these things, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. More stuff. We're getting close to the end of our time here. But hey, we're in chapter 3. That's better than I thought we might get. Okay. The Valar, having entered Arda, and being therefore confined within its life, must also suffer its slow aging, perceiving it as a growing weight upon them, since they are to the total Erma of Arda, in many ways similar to the Fear within the corporeal Hroar of the incarnate hröambari. Time out. Let's do that again. Because I don't know about you, but my mind was blown by this paragraph. Was your mind blown by this paragraph? Because my mind was blown by this paragraph. Let's do it again. The Valar, having entered Arda, and being therefore confined within its life. Now we knew that, both that the Valar came into Arda and that having gone into Arda, they were bound to it, right? That's what the published Ainulindalë, or not the Ainulindalë. Yeah, I do mean the Ainulindalë, says that its life is theirs. Remember that line from the Ainulindalë that says, its life is theirs? Did you know what that means? I didn't know what that meant. Its life is theirs. Okay? All right. But now it comes to it. Being confined within its life must also suffer its slow aging. So the Valar age. They feel the aging of the world because they are confined within the life of the world, within the life of Arda. Perceiving it, the aging of Arda, as a growing weight upon them, since they are to the total Erma of Arda. Now, Erma means matter, like all of the matter, all of the substance that Arda is made from, right? Yes, okay, so hang on a second. Time out further. Some people are surprised. Yes, the Valar age. Now, this is not new. This we knew. There are several references to the aging of the Valar. That goes back all the way to the Book of Lost Tales, if I'm remembering correctly. But even in later versions, we hear about the aging of the Valar. They do feel the passage of time. They are bound by the passage of time. They don't get gray because they don't have bodies, right? They're not bound to bodies. So, they don't get creaky joints and, need an ointment from Bilbo on his birthday or something like that. But what they do, apparently, they're perceiving it as a growing weight. We know that they were subject, in some sense, to the passing of time. But in what sense to the passing of time? Yes, Stephen, that's why even they will eventually envy men the gift of death. There's that reference in the Ainulindalë as well. Yes, exactly. That even the Valar shall envy. Exactly. Okay. So, but wait. So that, the concept that they're subject to aging, little crazy, but we've gotten that before, earlier in the history of Middle-earth. It's the last part of the sentence, which is mind-blowing. Since they are to the total Erma of Arda, in many ways, similar to the Fear within the corporeal Hroar of the incarnate. The soul of an elf or human is to their body as the Valar are to the matter of the world. The physical matter of the world is like the body of the Valar. They inhabit the physical matter of the world like a soul embodies the physical body, indwells the physical body. Whoa. Whoa. That is amazing. And it begins to help, it helps me anyway, to recontextualize the bodies of the Valar. And what is the difference between the hröambari, thank you for that word, Tolkien, hröambari, the incarnate, right? Those who are bound to bodies, those creatures, those Fear, who are bound to Hroar. Fea is the singular, Fear is plural, Hroa is singular, Hroar is plural. Fea is the spirit, Hroa is the body. Okay. Your spirit is bound within your Hroa. The two of them come together. He's going to talk about that more in a second. Well, let's read that and then we'll come back to the other thing. The Quendi, being immortal within Arda, also aged with Arda as regards their Hroar. So the bodies of elves age with Arda. Why? Well, what are their bodies made of? Erma. Matter. Physical Arda stuff. And so Arda itself is aging. So guess what? Their bodies, their Hroar, age as well, the elves, right? Because they're each of the elves, like an elf. What is an elf, right? An elf is a Fea, which is bound to a Hroa, which is a little chunk of Erma, a little chunk of Arda matter, right? That gets animated by, connected to, bound to, and animated by the Fea, right? But the Hroa part is still Arda stuff, and so it's aging along with Arda, right? So, okay, that makes perfect sense. But since, unlike the Valar, whose true life was not corporeal, and who assumed bodily forms at their own will as raiment, the being of the Quendi was incarnate and consisted naturally of the union of a Fea and a Hroa. This aging was felt chiefly in the Hroa. Okay, since all that is true, this aging, that is the aging of Arda, was felt chiefly in the Hroa. It's the Hroa that comes... So, by the way, well, hang on. I'll come back to that. There's so much. Okay. So the Valar's true life is not corporeal. The life of the Valar, their being, is the soul that has come into Arda from outside and been bound to Arda as a whole, to the matter of Arda as a whole. And the entirety of Arda is like the body of which they are the soul, right? So what happens then? What are we seeing when Olmos rises out of the waves, right? When we see a physical body for one of the Valar. It's something they assume at their own will as raiment. What does that even mean? Raiment means clothes, sure, but like, what does it mean for them to put on a body like a pair of clothes, right? Well, remember, if the whole Erma, the whole matter of Arda is like their body, it's like they are taking one little bit of Arda stuff, of Erma, right? And they're choosing to like manifest through that. It isn't their body. All of Arda is their body, right? But they're choosing to like show themselves through this one little bit, right? Just for a moment, putting it on like clothing. Drow Snake, it's a little bit like a sock puppet, but not exactly like a sock puppet. And yes, James, hröambari is the word I've asked for several times. I'm very grateful to receive it. Yes, I am appropriately grateful. Yes. Okay. Yes, Sean Strasberg, you are correct that it sounds like the very atoms of Arda are growing old and getting tired. Yes. Yes. It's unlike the materialistic view of atoms, which view them as fungible and unchanging. You're right. That is correct. That is correct. Okay, hang on. Several of you are asking about Melkor's power. Not going there yet. Not going there yet. We may get there. And if we don't, it's going to come up. It's going to. I'm confident it's going to come up. Yeah. Okay. Kurtz is asking, so the Quendi bodies are inhabited by the Valar souls as well as their own? Inhabited? No. Yes. No, they're tied to them, right? Because like anything that's connected with matter is connected to the Valar. Yes. Okay, so I will say this much about the corruption of Melkor. That's how the corruption of Melkor works. That's why Arda is marred. Because the marring of Melkor, the discord of Melkor, permeates all of matter, all of Arda. So yes. It's so they're tied to them, but they're not like, it's not like they're possessing them or something, or like, riding shotgun, within the hröa alongside the Fea of the elf, right? It's not like that. Because again, they're not in that chunk of matter more than any other chunk of matter, right? But they're connected to them. They're tied to them. That's one of the reasons why they're so protective of them, right? They're like their own children. Well, not exactly their own children. They're the children of Iluvatar. And why are they the children of Iluvatar? Because where does the Fea come from? The hröa is made of Arda stuff, right? But the Fea comes from Iluvatar. The Fea comes from outside. So you get the Fea comes in from outside, the elf Fea comes in from outside and is joined with a little chunk of Arda stuff, of Erma, which becomes the hröa. And now you've got an incarnate being, a hröambari, who is the combination of that Fea from outside and that hröa from within Arda. So you'll notice it's a scale thing, right? What happens with each soul of the hröambari, of the incarnate, humans and elves, is like a recapitulation. Notice it fits the same pattern, the same recapitulation pattern we see in Tolkien again and again. A story happens in big picture terms, right? In the first age, you get Fingon and Maedhros in the first age, and you get Sam and Frodo, and the Tower of Cirith Ungol in the third age, right? That, like, the same story gets repeated, but on a smaller scale. It goes all the way down, right? Goes all the way down. This is always happening. Yeah. This, as the Eldar say, was slowly consumed, that is the hröa, was slowly consumed by the Fea, until instead of dying and being discarded to dissolution, the hröa, it became absorbed, and eventually became no more than the memory of its habitation of old, which the Fea retained. Thus they have become now usually invisible to human eyes. But this has taken long ages to come about. So, the Fea of the elves eventually consume their hröa, so that they become invisible. It becomes absorbed, not consumed. It's not eating it, right? It's not like chewing away bites of their bodies or something. But it's absorbing their bodies until in the end, their bodies, there's nothing left of their bodies but the memories of their bodies. In the beginning, the hröar of the elves, their bodies, being supported and nourished by the great strength of their fear, were vigorous, resisting hurts, and healing such as they suffered swiftly from within. Their aging was therefore extremely slow by the measure of men, though they were in their earlier days as physical as men, or even more so, more strong, energetic, and swift in body, and taking greater delight in all bodily pleasures and exercises. So elves did have bodies, and their bodies were like ours, except for more vigorous. Stephen, I agree. We have hit upon yet another of the mythic things that he will not release. As Stephen, the fading of the elves. The fading of the elves. That goes back to the very, very beginning. Remember when Sam asks Strider for a story about the elves before the fading time, right? That question, the spirit of that question that Sam asks, that of the request that Sam makes of Strider, is the spirit of the beginning of Tolkien's creative life, basically. That's where Tolkien started, when he was like a teenager, right? Teen Tolkien was saying, tell me stories of the elves before the fading time. There are all these legends, all these stories that survive, these traditions that survive about fairy and about the fairies and the elves of old. But they're not still around anymore. They're invisible now. They've faded from the world, but not completely. They've not just vanished, and they were not just lies. They really did exist. And the world still remembers them, right? This is his world, right? And so, what were they like before the fading time? What was the ancient history of the elves? But it's a given from the beginning. From the beginning of the Book of Lost Tales, the very first thing that we have that he wrote, it's a given that the elves fade. And that in the modern world, right, in our world, elves might still be there, but not in the same way that they used to, right? Because it's the fading time now. Yeah. Sean, I would not suggest imagining black holes consuming nearby stars, drawing in inexorably tendrils of mass. It's not quite like that, right? It's not quite like that. Yes, Josiah is saying, deep they delved us, high they builded us, fair they wrought us, but they are gone. Right, the memories of the elves that the stones retain, right, and that perception that there were still places in the world, the castle with the tower, Tyrion among the trees. Why am I blanking on the English name of the thing? It's not Winchester. That's Warwick. Thank you. Good grief. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Warwick. Yes, Warwick. Warwick apparently is one of them. One of those places that retains the memory of the elves. You can read about this in Tyrion Among the Trees. Yeah. Okay. So there's another thing. So is he mythologizing his world? No, he's not stripping it of mythology. He's not changing his approach. But what he's doing, it's more like a marriage, as that was the metaphor I kept using in talking about Morgoths Ring. Marrying the historical and chronological narrative of a story like The Lord of the Rings, right, with the mythology and stories of the elder days. I want both, says Tolkien, right? And so that's, I think, what we're getting and what he's doing here. So George, yes, when Galadriel says, I will diminish, yes, this is the same thing. That's what she's talking about. She is consenting. It was the resistance to fading that was her temptation, right? She knows. It's coming. She feels it coming. And she doesn't want it to come. She resists. Until she doesn't. And that's why it's really important for her to say, I shall diminish and pass into the west and remain Galadriel. Absolutely. Yeah, good. Okay. All right. Well, that was an excellent start, folks. We got to the beginning of chapter 3. So this is why you'll notice I did not publish a reading schedule. Because the last time I did that, how many weeks did my reading schedule for Morgoths Ring cover? 12? Wasn't it 12? Didn't I map Morgoths Ring out in 12 sessions last time? We actually took 28 sessions to discuss Morgoths Ring, and I don't apologize for that. And I'm not going to apologize here either. We are going to take as long as it takes to discuss this book. 20 to 30 sessions is what I expect. So let's say read through chapter 6 next time. Maybe probably won't get past 5, but read to 6 and we'll see where we're going. So chapter 6, yeah, no, don't worry, John, I'm not going to take 144 sessions. That's not the plan. Yeah. So anyway, thanks everybody for joining. This was a lot of fun. I look forward to next week. Now, don't forget, at the beginning of class next week, I'm going to be doing our drawing to thank our wonderful donors. So I'm going to be giving away our golden ticket there at the beginning of class next time. So everybody who makes a donation between now and the start of next week's class will be entered into that drawing. Thanks everybody, and I will see you guys around. Thanks for coming on this adventure with me. Bye now.